Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another edition of TBR. I'm George Binns, and the discussion this evening is about the Varian cleanup. And to help us understand it better, we have with us an attorney from local area, Will Cosmas. Welcome, Will.
Thank you, George. Glad to be here.
So you've been involved in this for quite some time. We had, as you mentioned earlier before the show, a little get-together here when you were trying to get on the city council to help the project along.
That's right. There was a Salem News article that came out in November 2020 about the status of the cleanup of this site.
Yeah.
And we have a good friend who lives in the neighborhood, and I had just started my own legal practice at the time.
Okay.
And she called and said, "Can you help?" And I said, "Well, I'm a business litigator. I hope so. I don't know." Luckily, though, I still share office space with an attorney who used to work with Jan Schlickman, who's a famous environmental litigator. And we were able to coordinate with him and to start this group going called Voices of Concern North Beverly. And I've been working on a volunteer basis as an advisor for them since that time.
Yeah. Well, basically, to fill in some background, as you mentioned, 2000, when this thing, I guess, started, when Varian finally split and sold pieces of their company off, and they wanted to sell this site, and it was discovered that, for years they've been dumping stuff into the ground. I guess they just dug a hole and poured it in. And I guess the most egregious ingredient in the collection is trichloroethylene. And I had a little exposure to that myself. I had a job working in a warehouse, and one of my jobs was to deliver the big barrels, 55-gallon drums, and I had to go around behind the machinery. And, oh, boy.
Yeah.
Takes your breath away, literally.
Yeah.
So, TCL has been around, TCE has been around for a while, and it's kind of nasty stuff. So, there's, I guess, a motion realistically to let's get rid of it.
Absolutely, and it's not the only chemical that's in there. There's a PCE, perchloroethylene, as well.
That's even worse.
Yeah, there are a collection of chemicals known as volatile organic chemicals, or compounds, and they were used, as you had experience with at GE, as cleaning agents.
Yeah.
And that back 60, 70 years ago, or even longer, the practice was not to take as good care of them as people should.
Yeah.
So they were just dumped into the ground or dumped in a tank underground that would leak into the ground.
Yeah. Actually, it wasn't GE, it was Universal Spinning that I was working on. This is back in Rhode Island when I was working between semesters in college. And, like I said, a lot of people didn't recognize the hazard of it or the concern with it. And so what? And it's a pretty casual environment, I think, as you've been pointing out, that now we've got a problem. And I guess, fortunately, nobody's been hurt with it yet. Or am I guessing?
Well, I think that you're guessing. We don't know. It's not the easiest thing to prove.
Yeah.
Just to give a sense to your viewers of what we're talking about, the former Varian site is at 150 Sawyer Road, which is behind the Whole Foods Plaza across the street, currently owned and occupied by a company called CPI. And the way the topography of that area works is that from where the former Varian site is sort of like a bowl.
Yeah.
And it drains into the area down in North Beverly where Sonning Road is, where Hill Street and Lexington Street are. And that's led to this chemical plume migrating. These chemicals are, I'm not a scientist, I'm a lawyer, but they're to my understanding, they're denser than water.
Yeah.
And they, the bedrock can sort of, it can either seep into the bedrock or it can kind of keep the chemicals in the water.
Yeah, it's heavier than water, so it sinks. And Fortunately, it's not soluble in water, so it doesn't mix in too well. So it's not a solution, but it's just a mix. So that's a little bit of help. But it still flows with the water.
Absolutely.
And fortunately, nobody's using that for drinking water. But still, it's in the neighborhood, and it gets down behind the schools. And this is, I guess, a real concern of what is this stuff going to cause? And, I looked up some hazard data, and at about 300 parts per million, that gets to be very nasty. You got a 5-minute exposure.
Yeah.
Every 2 hours is what OSHA says you're good for. And having been exposed to it one time, I wouldn't stand there for 5 minutes.
Yeah. Well, it's probably why they gave the job to the college kid to move.
Yeah. And you learn to take a deep breath and move fast.
Right.
But again, it's the kind of thing that, well, that's just the way it was. And now we've got the problem. So I guess the question is, what has been done, or has anything been done?
So what's been done is this. Varian, which is the company that owned the site and discovered the waste and under the regulations owns the waste and the cleanup process, has been working under a regulatory scheme with DEP, Massachusetts Department of Environmental Protection, to on a cleanup plan that's been going on since 2002 or so.
Yeah.
And the chemicals are still there.
Yeah.
In fact, according to the Massachusetts contingency plan, they're required to give these reports that show, the rate of cleanup, the rate of, how much of the material is still in the ground at various wells in the neighborhood. These are 1,000-page reports that it really takes a professional to be able to understand. And they would just be filed in the library and put online. And therefore, it's kind of hard to kind of keep track if you're a normal resident of the neighborhood or a citizen of Beverly. And what happened is that Paul Layton from the Salem News looked into the issue in November or before 2020, saw there was a problem, and then a local resident in the neighborhood, Randy Reinbold, who is not a chemistry teacher. He teaches at St. John's Prep, but I think he teaches something in the humanities. I was surprised. I thought he taught science for what he did.
Yeah.
But he sampled a spring that he found draining into one of these streams near his house, where his children had played, where children play who go to shore or have played, Shore Country Day. And he took the sample himself. They took a backup sample as well and had it measured, and it was through the roof. And the reason is because that's an area where the bedrock juts out, it juts up, and so it was pushing these chemicals up into a stream, into the water. And the fact is that this far into the process, these chemicals should be really more resolved than they are.
Well, it gets to the interesting problem. You pour the stuff into the ground, and it soaks in. And because there's bedrock, there's a path for this stuff to mix in with the running rainwater. That's essentially what it is. And it all flows downhill. And if it's in the ground, mixed in, how do you get it out? Do you have to dig up the dirt and burn it off or something?
There are various ways that they've been trying a certain way for a long time that hasn't been completely successful, obviously, and that involves injecting chemicals at various sites. What the data shows is that the bad chemicals, the VOCs, will rebound a short while after the good chemicals have been injected to try to get rid of them.
You try to neutralize them, but you've got to put in almost as much stuff volume-wise to neutralize it as was poured in there. And from what I've picked up, they've been pouring stuff in there into the ground for 2 or 3 decades.
That's right.
So that's a lot of...
It's far too long. And, thinking as a parent, and thinking being in my friends' shoes and the friends that I've made through working with VOC, Voices of Concern North Beverly, which is this group that was formed. I can't imagine the daily cloud in my life thinking about these toxic chemicals under the ground where my children play and where I live under my house, affecting my property values. And we're told as children to clean up after ourselves, right? And we have regulations that exist to make sure that companies do that. And so there's another, it's turned out that there's another way to get rid of this stuff that doesn't involve just digging it up out of the ground. It's called thermal remediation. It involves sticking, again, I'm not a scientist, but it involves sticking resistors underneath the ground and volatilizing the chemicals so they, I understand, will just sort of evaporate. And that's something that we're really pushing for right now. One of the big issues is that there still remains a large amount of these chemicals at the site. And as long as there's these chemicals at the site, they're going to continue to leach into the neighborhood. And so we've been really working hard with Varian, but also with our state delegation, with Senator Lovely, Representative Paracella, with the city, with Mayor Cahill, and the members of the city council to get their attention. And it's really worked. It's been great. We've gotten DEP involved. They revoked Varian's what's called an ROS status, remedial operation status, which is something under the Massachusetts contingency plan, the regulatory framework, to allow companies to clean up these sites. And they said, you got to go back to the drawing board. What you've done isn't working. We're happy about that because it's the truth. It hasn't been working.
Well, thinking about what they're doing is essentially just boiling it off. You put a heater down there and put some energy into it, and you warm it up till you reach its point of evaporation. Well, it's a volatile chemical. I don't know what the other ones are. They're probably just as bad. But you're essentially boiling it off. Now you got to capture it. And I keep thinking of the old dump up on Brimble Avenue, Brimble Avenue number 1. And as you drive by there now, there's a solar field, but you notice there's these little things, pipes sticking up that have got a hook on the top. They're capturing the methane that's being generated by the decaying material in the dump. And I don't know, they closed that dump, 20 years ago now, and I would imagine you can still get methane coming off it. So this is a long-term process. And it's one thing to let a little methane out. That's not the best material, but the atmosphere takes care of that pretty well. Trichloroethane and some of these other chlorinated compounds, they're a little nastier, and they just hang around a bit longer. And you get to the question of, where are you going to dump this stuff? Into the neighborhood? Because we're back to the question of, it's something that gets to be a problem when you inhale it. So it's the distribution of it or the concentration of it in the air that gets to be the worry item.
Well, and it has been one of the ways that it can affect the neighbors the people who live in that neighborhood is by coming up through the ground, through their basements. And Varian has gone around, and the company that has been working with them, their licensed site professional, has been installing basement monitoring systems to see if there are chemicals that they're leaching up in that way through vapor. There's people who work at CPI with this material underneath them. And there's a vapor extraction system that is ongoing, I understand, at CPI to make sure that they're not harmed by it at work. But my understanding is that thermal remediation is something that can be done rather quickly as compared to the process that we've been going with, which has taken over 20 years and is not finished.
Well, quickly for a while, but again, the issue is one of how much stuff is in the ground, how much is already leached out by some mechanism, and how much is left. And I'm not sure that I've ever heard any sampling done around to find out that the concentration of the stuff in the ground is such and such.
Well, they've been doing that. There are wells throughout that neighborhood by the old Varian site where they've been measuring the data for 20 years now.
Yeah.
And that's the data that's shown that there's still material that needs to be cleaned up.
Yeah.
There are wells in and around the site that show chemical levels that are really off the charts and are very dangerous. And we've been working, as I said, with Varian and with the state, but this is a story about a group of neighbors really who came together to make this happen. And Varian has told us they'll do whatever it takes to make it right. And we've been working in good faith with them, and we really hope that that they'll follow through on that pledge. There were 80 people at Shore Country Day a couple weeks ago for the first of a series of meetings about this new plan that they're going to have to put together. And they expressed a lot of emotion that had been boiled up, a lot of anger, a lot of distrust. And it's easy to see where they're coming from because, again, this is something that's been going on for quite a while.
Yeah, and I think the issue you alluded to a little earlier is there's a lot of people that have some, they thought, valuable property, and it's going to take a hit if the word gets out that this is another Love Canal problem again.
Well,
so I mean, these are the horror stories that keep coming to people's mind when you think about contamination and how long it's gone on and how casually it was just dumped into the ground.
Well, and that's really the point, is that this material needs to be out of the ground. We need to have a process in place that gets to a permanent solution so that people no longer have to worry about those things. And they really didn't know, for the most part, until November 2020, that this was still a problem in their neighborhood.
Yeah.
Paul Layton's to be commended for writing that article because it really spurred people to get involved in their neighborhood and to make a positive change.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's the only way things are going to happen is somebody's got to scream and holler.
That's right.
And it's the neighbors that have to get together and make this happen. And, hey, this is what democracy is all about. That's the way it works. And it's not very pleasant at times. It's very difficult. And like you said, it gets to be a complicated problem of, well, what's this chemical? What's its volatility? What's its vapor pressure? What happens to it? How does it mix with water? And it gets to be messy, and it gets to be something that I think the average person would have a problem, trying to dance with these wizards saying, well, it's all right, nothing can go wrong, kind of thing. And I think you're to be commended, and the rest of the neighbors are to be commended to take this on. And I hope you all got the tenacity to stay with it until it gets done.
Well, I'm still here. I'm not going anywhere.
Yeah.
And I don't even live there.
Yeah.
I'm doing this completely on a voluntary basis, just trying to make a difference because I imagine myself in their shoes.
Yeah.
I went to 2 Jesuit institutes of higher learning that taught me to be a man for others.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm trying to do through this. We've been very lucky also to have David Lang involved. He's a former city councilor who's an environmental engineer.
He's been involved with the environmental in Beverly for years. Yeah.
He's been invaluable translating this material and advising us and helping us figure out, what does this mean? And what isn't happening that needs to be happening.
Yeah.
We've also been incredibly lucky to have the participation of Shore Country Day and their head of school, Claire Ward, who's, Shore has been, in my mind, an exemplar of a good corporate citizen in Beverly.
Yeah.
Because it affects them too.
Oh, yeah.
But they're also a good neighbor. they've really been instrumental in helping to get us to this point. The work's not done. We need to keep going. And it's important that the people of Beverly know that this is happening because it affects the entire city.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's fundamentally an issue of making a neighborhood in our city where we all choose to live together safe for people to live and secure for people to live.
I'm not sure how unsafe it is, but that gets to be a dicey question, and trying to understand what's going on. But at the same time, it's a matter of confidence. Do you feel comfortable? And if you, like you said early on, people just are comfortable. What's in the ground? And it's not so much the real hazard of it, but it's the issue of, well, what is it? What can it do? What are we going to do about it? Why hasn't something been done? And these are the questions I think that really need to answer very quickly to make people a lot more comfortable with the situation. And I think, as you point out, Shore Country Day is right on the border of it. And they've got the same issue. They've got a bunch of kids there that they're trying to educate. And what kind of exposure are they being put to?
Well, and like I said before, we've been, we are very grateful for the help that we've gotten from our state delegation and from DEP and from the city in terms of supporting this group of neighbors to get to their desired goal, which is, again, this sort of sense of security where they live.
Yeah.
And getting these things out of the ground.
Well, you mentioned early on that one of the neighbors just went out and took a sample. He found a place that would do an analysis for him, told him what's in it. And he got the shock and did something about it. And I guess the question is, has your committee been set up to say that, okay, somebody in the committee is designated to do the same thing? Once a week, once a month, every 2 or 3 months? Because it sounds like what triggered this whole exercise is an independent check. And it's not just reading your 1,000-page document kind of thing.
Thank goodness.
Unless you need a cure for insomnia.
Right.
But it's somebody going out and taking a sample and said, hey, you're not making any progress. What are you going to do about it?
Well, the thing.
So I guess, is there somebody in the city that's going to take on this kind of a role, or is it going to be left to the natives?
Well, the thing, George, is that the company Varian and for that matter DEP, because they were relying on Varian's licensed site professionals, didn't even know about that spring when it was found. It's been identified to them, and so now it's something that's measured and looked after. So. Now we're confident that DEP is taking a more involved role in this cleanup, and that Varian and their LSP is on notice. I mean, what happened in February of this year is that DEP revoked Varian's ROS status, which is a big deal. It doesn't happen very often, and so what we're trying to do is to really push the people whose job it is to clean up this sort of thing and to manage the cleanup and to supervise it, to do that and to make sure that we get to a final result without having to rely on history teachers at St. John's Prep to do the measurement for them.
Well, I hear what you're saying, but at the same time, if it was my neighborhood, I would love to have an independent check on the system. I mean, to expect somebody to wade through 1,000 pages and not even find this information is very unsettling.
Well, in fact, we do have an independent check. Shore Country Day has retained their own environmental consultant to be a sort of a peer review of what's going on, to look at the data that Varian's LSP has pulled together over time. And that has been the case since January of this year, and they've been working quite hard on that, I know. I also know that Representative Paracella earmarked a certain amount of money for the city of Beverly to hire its own consultant to work on that same sort of thing. So we're not operating on faith here. We're working in good faith with Varian to try to get to a solution here, and working with DEP and the state. But it's a trust but verify situation.
Yeah.
We hope that we can work together to get to a point where, again, these awful chemicals that cause horrible diseases and are awful for the environment are gone to the extent that they can be removed.
Yeah. So I guess we get to the issue that somebody's got to watch the watchers. Mm-hmm. And as long as this committee stays alive and functioning, I think there's some people who have a personal interest in it. And again, that's how cities really work, because you can't just depend upon the morass of the government to take care of all these problems, because this problem wouldn't have gotten this far if they had. So it's a proven case that something's got to be done, and something's got to be continually followed up.
It's been an inspiration and remains one. How the neighbors in that community have come together and have worked really hard, and it's been a hard slog.
Yeah.
But they've come together and they haven't stopped pushing, and we're not going to stop pushing until we get to something that's safe for them.
Well, they got money in the game, the value of their property, and they may not want to sell right now, but sooner or later something's going to motivate somebody to move on, and they don't want to take the hit. So that's a hard way to get motivation, but it's the real world. And at the same time, I think the work you're doing with the committee, providing them with the legal guidance, and the history teacher from St. John's Prep is triggering, I think, some actual science in the issue as to what's really going on. That's a very positive sign. So
again, it's been an inspiration, and it's not just their property; it's their children's lives.
Oh yeah.
So that's a big deal.
So it sounds like it's under control for the time being, and we'd like to have you come back sometime and give us an update as to how's it going. Is it still making progress?
I'd be glad to. And these public improvement meetings or public input process meetings will be happening on a relatively regular basis, and they're open to everybody in the community.
Yep.
So they can hear updates as well. We are moving in a positive direction. We need to keep moving that way.
Yep. Great.
And so we're hopeful that we can do that.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for watching us this evening. And this is one of those serious issues that needs to be followed continuously and drive this thing into the ground once and for all. And thanks for watching, and stay tuned.